The Supreme Court set to rule on gay marriage this month, and that is one of the social issues that's right in the middle of the culture wars that are flaring up. And oh yeah, we have a presidential election next year. It's also a big topic in Barney Frank's new book called Frank, A Life in Politics, From the Great Society to Same-Sex Marriage. And Andrew, he spoke to the former Massachusetts congressman earlier today.
And Rich, the 32-year House veteran and I touched on a range of topics from Hillary Clinton to whether the nation is becoming more liberal. But we began with something of a surprise from his autobiography. Now, given all that everybody knows of his life and his career, a lot of you might have forgotten that Barney Frank began his career in public service very much in the closet and had to hide his sexual identity, at least for a time.
Well, I feel good about that in the sense that it's, I think it's been part of the process in which people have taken some things for granted as reasonable that used to be very controversial. But when I first went to work in politics full time, it was 1967, there was just no possibility of being openly gay and having any kind of a career. I mean, the condemnation of those of us who were homosexual was just overwhelming. We sort of participated in it a little bit ourselves. And when I ran for office in '72, things had begun to change. I mean, my first few years included the Stonewall situation. So by the time I got elected to the legislature in '72, it was possible to be supportive of equality for LGBT people, but not to be one of them. So I spent the next 15 years in elected office as an advocate. And I did make this decision when I decided to run for office, that I would be a coward but not a hypocrite, that I would not have the courage to tell people who I was in terms of my sexual orientation. But unlike some other people, which I found particularly contemptible, you know, seeing it Dennis Hastert now, I was not going to engage in activities personally and then vote to make them illegal and persecute other people who did them. I pretty soon after that said, no, this is not working, and spent about 7 or 8 years figuring out how to do it.
And in the book, you tell an anecdote about coming out and talking to the Speaker of the House, who also worked in a neighboring district, Tip O'Neill, and a funny anecdote that he relayed as he was trying to disseminate the information.
Tip was a very smart man. He always had the music right, but he sometimes didn't get the words. And yeah, he did tell someone that we're going to have an issue we're going to have to deal with. Barney Frank's going to come out of the room.
And it turns out that press secretary for Tip O'Neill was Chris Matthews.
Yes.
Press secretary. Yep. There have now been gay members of Congress, openly gay members of the Senate. There's even a bisexual governor, though she was not appointed. She was appointed to the job. She wasn't elected. Do you think we're anywhere close to being ready to have a gay president of the United States? Not
for a while, for two reasons. First of all, unfortunately, all the elected officials you've mentioned who sustained themselves in office after identifying us as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender have been Democrats. The country as a whole has made great progress. Unfortunately, and I know people say, oh, why do you bring up partisanship? Well, it's part of reality. To ignore the partisanship that has developed around LGBT rights is to distort the facts. The Republican Party continues to be anti. You're going to see a competition among Republican candidates for president, which they will all be opposed to any further advance. And even if the Supreme Court does decide, as I hope it soon will, that we're going to have the right to marry, they'll denounce it. They'll be critical of it. Some of them will be secretly happy that it's not an issue anymore, but they're going to have to say they're against it.
Well, here in the more liberal blue Northeast, there's a sense that a lot of gay rights questions have been asked and answered at this point. Gay marriage likely to become nationwide after the Supreme Court ruling. Even when it comes to things like the Religious Freedom Bill in Indiana, there was a lot of pushback against that. But is that a misconception, a misnomer just here in a very blue section of the country, that gay rights questions have in fact been asked and answered?
No, and you make a good point about it's why I'm ultimately optimistic about Indiana. We've had this as a moral issue, and those people, obviously those of us who are LGBT ourselves, but others have joined in and said it's wrong, it's morally unfair to discriminate. Well, that's helpful to have morality on your side, but to really win decisively in America, it doesn't hurt to have the profit motive weigh in. And we've now had the business community in Indiana, most recently in Louisiana, in Arkansas, say to people, you know what, take your bigotry elsewhere. If you don't like gay people, that's your business. Don't tell me that I have to make a choice between discriminating or not discriminating and alienating people in both sides. And when you get in the way of the profit motive, you're in big trouble in America. So that makes me optimistic. On the other hand, It is in most states in this country, not I think less than half the population lives there, but in most of the states, there is no law protecting you against being fired or hired, not hired, or demoted based on your sexual orientation. You can't say, I'm not hiring you, you're a Catholic, or you're an evangelical Protestant, you're a woman, you're disabled in some way, you're black, you're Hispanic. But if you're a lesbian, I don't want to have anything to do with you. So yeah, we do have, and in some parts of the country, that's a serious economic issue.
Gay rights, one of the so-called culture war issues, along with things like immigration or the legalization of marijuana. And for the past 30 years, if not longer, we've been hearing that this is a center-right country. But looking at the polls on those issues and other cultural issues, are we becoming more of a center-left country? Is the country moving towards a more progressive inclination?
Oh, I think it's moving. There's a kind of, when you ask conservative, liberal people say conservative, when you break it down to issues, you know, the public doesn't want cutbacks in Social Security and Medicare. The public wants a minimum wage. It's not just in the issues you correctly mentioned. I think we've packaged it somewhat wrong. But yeah, I think we should be take these issues to them. Some of my colleagues suffer from cultural error, but marijuana is another example. The public is ahead of the politicians on this. And I think there is a great sense of, you know what, let us live our lives the way we want. And at the same time, I guess here's the deal. I think the conservatives in some ways have been, we're opposites in this way. Liberals have been for greater freedom in our personal lives, but we understand, I think, that economics, you need to have we're inextricably linked to each other. The more conservative position has been the opposite. We won't tell you how to protect the environment, but we'll tell you what to do in your personal life. And I think the public is ready to move in our direction on both.
Your reputation is of something of a progressive icon. Hillary Clinton seems to be the party's standard bearer for 2016. Is she progressive enough for your taste? Would you like to see Hillary Clinton move more to the left?
Oh yeah. Look, if I am a little bit to her left on some issues, but if I thought someone who agreed with me on every issue could run for president, maybe I would have. Certainly if I was straight, I might have. But the problem we have is getting enough votes for the areas where she's correct. The real fight in America, unfortunately, maybe, is between the liberalism of Hillary Clinton and many others and to her right. The notion that we have this luxury of spending all our time fighting between the liberals and the more liberal and the further left, that's reproducing the era of the Republicans.
That was only a portion of our conversation. For the complete unedited interview, head over to YouTube and search for Richard French. And Rich, I asked Barney Frank why there wasn't a progressive version of a Tea Party that was pulling the Democratic Party for the left. He said, quite simply, because we want to win.
And it'll be interesting what Mr. Sanders, if he can cause a little bit of problems for Hillary in the primary as well. Great interview, Andrew. Thank you. And again, you can see the extended version, as Andrew said, online. Now, coming up next, speaking of Ms. Clinton, she has two Democrats running against her. Martin O'Malley and the aforementioned Mr. Sanders. They're in the race. They're not going to win, but the question is, do they have a chance to make a difference and cause the woman on your screen some headaches in the process?